forces us to find a new center of gravity. Don't fight. Instead, try to find a new way to stand. Now, this was said by the American talk show host, author, actress, producer, and philanthropist, Oprah Winfrey. Now, I have a small question for you. Why and how does this relate to our motherland, Sri Lanka, especially in the year 2022? Sri Lanka right now is going through a very tough time, the worst economic crisis, and we have defaulted on multi-million pounds of foreign debts. Our cash reserves have virtually run dry. And not just that, people of Sri Lanka, they don't even have a way to put food on their table. To make matters worse, we have lost access to the basic necessities, to the daily basic necessities like fuel, gas, and electricity. Now, what are we gonna do? What, where, and how will we find a way out of this? Now, how are we going to come out of this crisis? What are the ways that we can actually fight back? Amidst all this crisis, Sri Lankans have reached out to many foreign nations seeking for a helping hand. And Japan has acted as a ray of hope to us Sri Lankans. Now, my next question is, what do the Japanese really think about Sri Lanka and us Sri Lankans? What are the things that we can learn, adopt, and practice from the lives of these Japanese individuals? How can we move forward? This is the most important thing. How are we going to find a new way to stand back once again as a nation that is respected around the world? Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we have joined hands with the Sri Lankans and the Japanese, bringing to you the knowledge, expertise, and the ability to guide you and me through this journey of learning, unlearning, and understanding the true concepts, the true values behind the scenes. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned with us as we explore a variety of different fields, as we navigate a variety of different avenues. I am your host, Pasandi Theories, and you are watching Beyond the Struggle.
Hello everyone. So today with us we have a very special person from Japan. So let's hear a bit about himself from him. Hi Mr. Inoue.
はい。
Welcome to
はい、
the
どうも、こんにちは。
Konnichiwa. So I would like to ask you to please explain to our viewers about yourself.
OK。私の名前は井上啓二です。
Hi.
仕事は高速道路の照明器具、ライティング、
そうです。
それとパワーエナジー、
はい。
原子力発電所の照明器具、
はい。
あとはペトロステーションの照明器具がメインです。
はい。
それで去年2021
Yes.
リタイアしました。
Okay.
で、年は81歳です。
81歳。
はい。
Yes. So Mr. Inoue was previously working in the very power and energy industry, and he has had a lot of experience in that field. And he is his age is actually 81 years now, and he's still coming to Sri Lanka. So yes, let's dive into the next question. Okay,
Hi.
so let's ask him a bit about how he came to know Sri Lanka. So, Mr. Inoue, tell us, how did you come to know about Sri Lanka? And why did you come to Sri Lanka for the first time?
ファーストタイムはスリランカのハイプリスト。
はい。
ハイプリストは、スリパーダ。
スリパーダ。
スリパーダのハイプリスト。
Okay.
優しい
優
プリスト、ハイプリスト。
High priest, okay.
日本に来られました。
Okay, so this.
その
Okay, so the high priest of Adam's Peak that you and I know, a very kind priest has gone to Japan, and that is when Mr. Inoue met him. So,
それで京都、奈良のお寺を1週間案内しました。はい。
so in Nara and Kyoto, he has been staying in temples during his stay in Japan.
それでお坊さんが帰られてから大変ありがとうございました。ぜひスリランカにいらしてください。
はい。
と言われました。
そうですか。
それからスリランカを勉強しました。どんな国ですか。その時はスリランカじゃない、セイロンと言ってました。
セイロン。
ノースリランカ、セイロン。
セイロン。
知らんと言ってました。
Very interesting. So, when he met this high priest and he has served him with so many things when he was in Japan, the high priest has invited Mr. Inoue to come and visit our little motherland. So that is how Mr. Inoue started to know about Sri Lanka. But the interesting fact is that when Mr. Inoue knew about Sri Lanka, it wasn't actually called Sri Lanka. It was called Ceylon.
それで私が知らなかったことが1951年。
1951年、
1951。
サンフランシスコ。
サンフランシスコ講和条約。
はい。
ジャパンがセカンドウォーでロスした。その時のスピーチで名古屋から来たノースはロシア、名古屋からサウスはアメリカ、イングランドがコントロール。それをスリランカのその時の財務大臣の大蔵省かなのジェア・ワルデネケという方がスピーチをされました。それが憎しみは愛を持って償うというのは大変難しい言葉です。これはね、ベリーアングリーだけどもう忘れて愛を持って日本をフォローしましょうというメッセージをサンフランシスコ講和条約でスピーチされた。それで日本は一つのアイランドで終わったんです。ジャーマニーは分かりました。ロシアと それでびっくりしたんですよ。その時に、あ、それならスリランカに一度このハイプリストが呼ばれてるから行きましょうって来たわけ。それが初めてです。
Hi. So it's a very interesting story. So actually, when he first started researching about Ceylon and seeing what kind of a country Ceylon is, he came across the fact that in 1951 at the San Francisco Peace Summit, which was held in September 1st, on the September 1st, it actually changed the perspective of how the two countries, Japan and Sri Lanka, as two nations, acted as not just a diplomatic nation, but also on a humanitarian basis. Why? Because the speech made by Mr. J.R. Jayawardena at the summit, saying that hatred cannot be seized by hatred, but by love. Those very words inspired him to come to Sri Lanka after the invitation, because he knew that that helping hand that we gave to Japan in 1951 was the very reason for Japan to become a more developed country right now in the world. So that is the story of what inspired Mr. Inoue to first come and visit Sri Lanka. So the very first year Mr. Inoue came to Sri Lanka was actually 1971. That was 20 years later from the San Francisco summit, which was held in 1951. So, Mr. Inoue, what was the image the Japanese people had about our country, Sri Lanka, then, back then, 1970s? So.
まずはブディスト、
はい、
ブディストカントリー、スリランカ。
そうね。
ジャパニーズもブディスト。それでお寺へテンプルに行った時皆がお坊さんに座って挨拶をする。日本ではないことです。できない。日本はない。だけどスリランカのお坊さんはみんなのためにブッダンサラカンガッチャに。日本人は日本のお坊さんは違う。みんなのためじゃない。ブッダのためにブッダンサラカン。スリランカのお坊さんはみんなのために代表してブッダンサラカンガッチャに。それにびっくりしましたね。びっくりしたそれは。
So the image, when talking about the image about what Japanese people had about Sri Lanka back then, was the fact that we were a Buddhist nation because the majority of our people back then were Buddhist. So was the people of Japan. They were also Buddhist. But there was a vast difference between how the Buddhist in Japan behaved and the Buddhist in Sri Lanka behaved, especially when talking about the priest that stayed in those temples and the priests that actually stayed in our temples. So that was one of the reasons that made the Japanese people curious about what kind of nation Sri Lanka really was. So Mr. Kenji Inoue, tell me, what do the Japanese people actually think of Sri Lanka right now? Right now we are going through a very hard time, a very difficult time. So what do the Japanese people think about Sri Lanka in 2022?
はい。まず政治家、ガバメント。
Government.
大問題です。
そうですか。
それは全部ほぼ 99%。
そうですか。Yes. So Mr. Inoue says that 99% of people have lost their faith in the current political system, particularly the government of Sri Lanka, which is a very, very sad circumstance, but that is the reality, that is the truth. So, Mr. Inoue, tell us, how was your experience in Sri Lanka? Was it good or was it bad? And why do you think that it was a bad experience or good experience?
まずファース
Much
ト
first.
まずファーストね、ファーストはオンタイム
So,
オンタイムのスリランカタイム
so
Why スリランカタイムはデレイオンタイムまずファーストナンバー2はお父さんお母さん
はい。
兄弟をもっと大切にしないルックアフターするルックアフター今はちょっとファミリーセパレートになってますヤングファミリーとまだロングセパレートもっとこれが2つそれとスリランカ人シンハラランゲージも OK だけどやっぱりイングリッシュインターナショナルです
そうです。
ですからもっとスリランカも日本も何もないスリランカは T ジャパンはここがあっただからスリランカもイングリッシュで IT の仕事をするべきスリランカジェム T それとスリランカはベリベリラッキーなのはワンシーズン、オンリーサマー。ジャパンは4シーズン。ウィンター、スプリング、サマー、ウィンター。もうベリーディフィカル。だけど日本人はジャパニーズはだからアジアでトップになったのはなぜかオンタイムでしたわけ。
そう。
ノーデレイオンタイムです。
それは、very important です。
important.
So Mr. Inoue says that his experience, taking into consideration his experience in Sri Lanka, the number one thing that comes to his mind is time management. He says that the people in Japan especially, people around the world especially, the reason for their development is working on time. But in Sri Lanka, does it really happen? Do you really work on time? So that is a very good question. He says time is a matter that can change the world for even a nation. It can make us a developed nation from a developing nation. And the second one he says is the lack of togetherness that he sees right now in Sri Lanka. Through his experience, he has seen that before the families were actually together, they were united, and through that unity, they were able to overcome certain challenges. But when taking the younger generation or the current generation, this is not really the fact that is happening right now, because they are kind of separated from each other. And the third one he says is the fact that Sri Lanka has many resources, from tea to gems to
Only.
yes, tea to gems and so many things. So he is asking, why can't we actually take a use of these resources and utilize them to make our experience, to make others' experience about Sri Lanka a good one? So that is a really great question.
Yes,
Thank you,
yes,
Mr. Inoue.
yes.
Right now, Sri Lanka is going through economic crisis. So, Mr. Inoue, from your experience, can you share with us some tips or some ways how we can face this challenge and overcome this in a more better way?
Now, number one, young generation. So, ジャパンも ジェネレーションギャップ、今、ジャパンとアイディア、ヤングジェネレーション、ビッグパワーです。ビッグパワー。だから問題はオンタイム。ブディストはね、これ取ったエブリデイサンデーね、ゴーツーテンプル、靴も全部でブッダされる。だから、OK、まちゃん、tomorrow, 10 o'clock morning, OK、まちゃんカムに、10:30、30 minutes、ロス、30 minutes は取ったことになる。泥棒です。3人俺はね、30 minutes、2人で1 hour、あなたが取ったこと。オンタイムに切れば何も取らない。ノーロス。だからまずタイムしか、それしかない。アホじゃないスリランカ人賢いです。もうそれ一つもう何もいいことない。朝はみんな早いです。モーニング。スリランカ人。本当に朝早い。日本人はダメ、遅い。私は早いけどね。だけど、それだけ早いのにどうしてデイタイムはデレーなのかね。これがもう一番です。
そう、一番、フィニッシュね。そう、2番は、
2番はね、何が違うか。それはね、一番簡単なことです。簡単なこと。ワンシーズンしかないわけ。ワンシーズン。日本は4シーズン。これだけロストマニー。スリランカ人はワンシーズン。で、これも全部。日本は4シーズン。全部チェンジしない。長いの。
So just like Mr. Inoue said, the most crucial advantage that we have over the Western world and even Japan is that we have just one season to fight with. But they, on the other hand, have 4 seasons, spring, summer, autumn, winter, to fight against. And they have to change their clothes, their lifestyle, their food, everything to suit that season. And for that, it would take them a lot of money and a lot of effort, which drains their resources. But for us, we are used to this sun, this bright, shiny weather. So why do we not take use of that advantage? That is what Mr. Inoue is asking. Okay, Mr. Please.
それと3つ目はね、
はい。
日本には男のしゃべる言葉と女の言葉しゃべる言葉が違うんです。男言葉、女言葉が。これ日本だけです。タイもちょっとワンランゲージ、タイはね。ジャパンはオールランゲージ。メン、レディースは違います。スリランカ全部男女一緒でしょ。だからその2つね。はい。男言葉と女言葉。
Yes. So what Mr. Inoue explained just now was the language that is used between men and women in Japan. So when taking the Japanese culture into consideration, the Japanese people have a different kind of approach to how the men and women in the society speak. The difference is vast. It is seen in their culture. Men speaks in a certain way while women acts and speaks in a certain way. But in Sri Lanka, according to Mr. Inoue, and of course according to all of us, what we can see is that men and women are treated equally on an equal scale. They speak, they talk, they fight all together, and that is the greatest strength we have to overcome not just this problem but every problem that comes our way, right?
はい、そうです。
So, Mr. Inoue, we had quite a long discussion where we spoke about so many things, and it was really interesting to hear. It went from the San Francisco summit to now, and our relationship with Japan and with you, with our people. So taking all of these experience that you have had through 81 years of your life, what is the final message that you want to give our viewers all around the world and to Sri Lankans and to the Japanese people?
OK、スリランカはね、お金持ちの裕福な国です。お金がたくさん。どうしてか。ライスはワンには3回取れる。裏行ったらパパイヤがある。こっち裏バナナがある。上にはマンゴーがあってココナッツがある。そんな国は世界にないです。日本ないですよ。それでもどうして食べないかんから我々は時間を守り、約束を守ったんですよ。だからスリランカはお金持ちの国なんです。だから働かなくてもいいから気がついたらこうだったかな。だから一番大切なことはね、男も女もサロンを履くことですよ。サロン。
そう。
あれでもワンシーズンいけるでしょ。日本無理です。サマーシーズン OK だけど。だからサロンというのは非常にいいものなんです。だからそれをみんながサロン履かない。ジーンズだとかなんとかかんとか。やっぱりそういうカルチャー、文化のさ。だからスリランカ人は朝が早いです。朝が早い。時間を守ればもっと伸びる。約束を守ればね。だから日本人も悪い人はいてますけどね。だけど、もうスリランカ人には負けます。時間が早い。朝。
So finally, taking everything into conversation, we had quite a long conversation. Mr. Inoue had something to say to us, and that was that we, as a nation, possess so many strengths. We are rich in so many ways. Why? Because we have so many resources at our disposal. We have the rice fields coming from one side, the paddy to feed our stomachs. We have the fruits and the vegetables coming in. We have so many things that other nations wish they had. But are we really taking the use of these resources? He questions us. And also he goes on to say that our mornings are quite early. The people around Sri Lanka are accustomed to this tradition of waking up at the sound of the cock who rises early and gives the sound. So we wake up quite early naturally. It's in our body, it's in our genes. So why don't we really take the use of these early mornings that helps us? So that is his second question. Why do we waste time? Why do we waste that? Why don't we manage our time in order to use our early mornings wisely? And the third one he uses actually the sarong as a great example to emphasize the Sri Lankan culture around Sri Lanka. He says the sarong is something that can be worn at any time. Is it the summer or the winter or anything? It is accustomed to the weather patterns in Sri Lanka. It's accustomed to anything which happens in Sri Lanka. It can be easily worn. So just like that, he says, the Sri Lankan culture is built up on these amazing traditions, on these amazing human connections that enable us to fight any obstacle that is put forward as a nation, as a country, as a community. And for that, he says, if we take these three things into our minds, into our heads, and not just talk about it, but act on it, we can overcome this situation, right? So, Mr. Inoue, do you, apart from everything, do you have something to add to today's conversation?
Today, I'm very happy today. それともう一つは、スリランカの人は食べるときはこれで食べます。はい。ナンバーワンです。はい。これ本当です。日本はお箸、チョップティックス。これ無駄です。これで食べたい。
そうです。Yes.
そのカルチャーがナンバーワンですよ。
ありがとうございます。
日本も昔は手で食べてた。そうよ。
そうですね。So he says, we take the food through our hands, the food that is cooked, that has a long process of coming to our plate. Before it goes to our stomach, there's a long process behind the food in your plate. And we respect that food by eating it with our very own hands. It is true that other nations also respect their traditions and culture, but he says this culture is very important. It shows that we are very towards humanitarian side of the world. So he says that is the number one trait that he sees in our culture, and that trait can lead us to make a better world. So, Mr. Inoue, thank you very much.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us today. It was
Yes.
my pleasure
No,
to
no,
have
no,
you
no, no, no.
as our very first guest. I'm sorry if we made any.
いや、だからね、これはいらんことだけど、今は2022。Why? Japanese calendar 2650. Japan. クリスチャンは2022. Japan. Buddha. 2650. Why all people 2020? まあ、モスリムはデファレンスね、モスリムはね。ブッダ、セーム、スリランカ。どうして Why?
So, Mr. Inoue, thank you very much. He has provided us with great insights from his experience, and I, as a person, learned a lot. I hope you, as people, as youngsters watching this today in our platform, will learn a lot. Thank you very much for excusing me and guiding me through this conversation.
No, okay.
I hope I was able to kind of bring the questions that we had in mind.
Study in Japan? Ladies language.
ありがと
No boys.
う。So,
Boys talk, yeah, pin. Sure.
so thank you very much, Mr. Inoue.
Welcome, welcome.
ありがとう。
はい。